places that I enjoy are, environmentally conscious, centric, um, and good air quality. And I think it means more to me that what community is there? Where do I feel most comfortable with this particular community of people?
And I just think it comes down to the community piece, right? It's like, where do you feel
Yeah.
home? Where do you feel the most connected? And I think that has always been what living off the land has meant, is like having
Hmm.
connections with people. And I think that's a big thing of like what's missing nowadays. Like we're so connected through social media and like the internet that like people don't have the same type of relationship like that. Welcome to the Teens Uncharted podcast. I'm your host, Charity Chafee. I'm a licensed mental health counselor who specializes in teens and families. The sassier, the better. That is my brand. And joining me today, I'm very excited to have Gregory Meadows. Do you want to take a second and say hi and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Gregory Meadows. I am the owner of Walking Meadows Life Coaching. I work with parents, adolescents, and teens that have been impacted by trauma, abuse, neglect, situational, stressful things. And I'm originally from Kentucky, lived all over the country, and I am so excited to be here, Charity. So thank you very much.
Yes, of course. Um, I just love, and I know we talked a little bit about it, like the traveling piece, and I think that it's a really cool. And so, like,
Mhm.
we talked a lot about like your traveling space and around like kind of how you've built this like business for yourself. And I think it's really incredible because you had said you're like, I didn't know this could ever be a thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that one thing I love and appreciate about like different brains in this type of work is that we think about a lot of things constructively. So I love the fact that you're like traveling, you're doing all this, you're living all around, because I do feel like it just enriches like work, right? And your understanding of like cultural and connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I think many of us, including myself, we have a box that we think in, right? And this is where I make money. I have to be sitting at a desk. I have to be in a location. I work 40 hours a week, and there's a lot of safety in that, a lot of like stability in that. And for me, it's taken me a while to confess that I have some gypsy genes, some nomadic genes, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a part of me that really enjoys the travel, being in different communities. And so I've traveled to 7 or 8 different friend communities that I have been in, and you know, it really took me kind of, I would say, I ran and jump off a cliff, and I tend to do that. So I'm sort of a reluctant, kind of stubborn person to think outside the box, and I just ran and jumped off the cliff, and I was like, oh. This is possible for me, out there in the world. You see all these people that are traveling, bringing in income and things like that from a nomadic space. And so for me, I had to kind of just trust and jump and take a leap of faith. And things have serendipitously started to kind of come to me, different contracts, different opportunities to teach parenting classes and, one-on-one clients and families virtually. And so I'm really grateful that I get to do this, not only for my personal well-being,
Yeah.
but in a professional way too.
Yeah. Um, I love that. Um, I think it's like I think about the idea of like taking that risk, right? And I think about how that is what we ask clients all the time to do,
Yeah.
right? It's like take the risk, is to like listen to the things that are guiding us. And you had just said like it's not always an easy thing.
Yeah, exactly. And parents oftentimes, many in our contemporary society, we're very well resourced. I mean, you can go to the internet and ask any sort of question. You can get 1,000 YouTube videos, all those sorts of things. And sometimes going from theory to practice can be a leap of faith, right? Especially like I was speaking with a parent yesterday, and I was like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you tried this? And she's like, I've tried that. I've tried that. I've tried that. I've tried that. And so, you know, there is a leap of faith in sort of um, trying something more consistently, right? Like, oh, I tried this for 2 days and it didn't work, or helping them see things in a new way, or understand that they may have tried this 6 months ago, but your child is different than 6 months ago, right? So what didn't work back then may work now, and having the support, whether that's family, friends, therapist, coach, those sorts of things, while things are still bumpy, is important to the healing process and to the stabilization process.
Yeah. Can we talk about the consistency for a second? Because
Sure.
I know we both work with like parents and families. And one thing that's so interesting to me when I'm working with certain folks is that they'll say, like, I did try that, right? For an
Hmm.
hour or 2 hours or a day or 2 days, right? But can you talk about when you say consistency, what does that actually look like over the course of time?
That's a great question. And I think I am a person who believes in tracking things, data driven. And that doesn't have to mean you have to put it in a spreadsheet and a pie chart and all that sort of thing. What I mean
Right.
is that at the minimum, you get out a piece of paper and a pencil and you literally write down things like, okay, we want to track outbursts, right? And so, are we seeing outbursts? Because in our fight or flight nervous system brain, we might say, "Oh, my kid gets angry every single day. It seems like he's been angry every single day for the last month, right?" And our brains are not too good at tracking things longitudinally, and we can extrapolate and create these stories which end up impacting our capacity. My child's been angry for the last month and I don't know what's going on. Well, does that mean 30 days or does that mean 2 times last week and 1 time this week, right? And we
Yeah.
just kind of extrapolate that. So consistency means regulating ourselves, right? And into having the capacity, but tracking information, right? Like, oh, I noticed over the last three outbursts, they were kind of in the morning. What happened? Well, we were getting ready to go to school. My teenager was kind of feeling rushed, and I kind of got onto them about not cleaning the room and what have they got to do when they get home and all these sorts of things. So by tracking and just kind of keeping information, we're able to kind of see these patterns, these dots. We can start to connect these dots, right? And when we see a pattern over time, we can acknowledge what that pattern is and where the breakdown is. Okay, maybe I don't address my child's messy room in the morning because they're not a morning person. They're really triggered about school. So now I just I just put a
A
grenade
bomb.
in,
Yeah.
a bomb right before they're going to go to school and they're really triggered. But once we have that data, understanding a couple things, which means, um, for example, the parent that I spoke to yesterday, um, admitted that she has not been consistent. So when friction comes up, she tends to just back off and avoid the conflict or avoid confronting the particular issue. And so now this child is used to getting their way.
Yes.
Like if I press on my parent, if I yell and I slam the door and I do these things, my parent will back off from me. And so that didn't kind of happen overnight. So that's a pattern that the child is training the parent, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So we're negatively reinforcing like when I throw a fit, I eventually will get my parent to back off and I will get my way or I will avoid whatever I need to do. And so because patterns of family system breakdowns don't happen overnight. They're not going to get repaired overnight. So,
Right.
preparing parents for the reality that if we did not deal with a particular negative behavior that's impacting the family or the relationship between the parent and the child, if we didn't deal with that kind of when they were younger, now they've had years of being able to reinforce that behavior, admitting that it's going to take some time to undo that behavior because it's a learned behavior. It can can be undone. It's not a guarantee that it will be undone, but it's important to have support as you're undoing a reinforced behavior. And so for some children, it might take a week. For some children, it might take a month. For some children, it might take 3 months, right? But the important part is the consistency. When we are consistent as caregivers and parents, we are grounded and rooted in what we believe to be right and true for our family and things like that. And despite what anyone else says, or your child's like, I hate you and I'm mad at you, like to understand that, like, we as the adults have enough foresight and wisdom
Mhm.
to to say, okay, this is the right thing to do. This is the life skill that I want to teach, and it's going to be bumpy a little bit learning it because we're unlearning other behaviors and adding in new behaviors. So that's a large nutshell around consistency and what that means.
Yeah, no, totally. And you touched on a really great point because I think that when we are thinking about like the parenting journey, right, we have or parents are creating a narrative in their head, right,
Hmm.
when they're going through all of these different things that they're working on, right? And I
Hmm.
think that like adding research, right, adding data to the narrative helps give us a basis of what's actually happening, right? I think there's a question of like what's the narrative, and then there's another question of like what is the data actually telling us, right?
Yeah.
In regards to like what's real, right? When I think about grad school, I had a lot of really great professors, but I had one professor who would say, leave your stuff at the door, right? I had
Hmm.
a high school swim coach that was like, leave anything you're feeling at the door that day, right?
Hmm.
I feel like that totally neglects and dismisses the idea that like as a person, as a human that day, we have certain tolerances, we have so many spoons, we have everything going on for us. If we're just going to leave it at the door, then we're not actively reflecting on what's happening in that moment that could be impacting our own narrative of what that is. So it's like really giving parents an opportunity to like step back, get the data, right? Have your narrative. How do those things like reconcile together, right? And then
Yeah.
really focusing on like one specific thing, right? Because I imagine you have people that come in that they're like, everything needs to change.
Right. And so as I totally agree. And as parents, we often think from the end, right? I want them to clean their room every day. I want them to take the trash out. I want them to empty the garbage on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, right?
Yeah.
And so when we think from the end, we can create a lot of discomfort for ourselves that, the child is not here,
Yeah.
right? And so stepping back and saying, okay, I want my kid to clean their room every day. So maybe I'm going to start out with 1 day a week. They're not cleaning the room at all. So going to 1 day a week, we're able to sort of titrate and slowly increase a preferred behavior or a preferred chore and things like that. So it's important to understand that we're not going to yell at a baby because it's not walking. Why aren't you walking? Right? So we understand that the baby is going to learn how to keep their head upright. And then they're going to have to stand and be able to stand and, feel themselves, balancing, right? And then they're going to take a step and then they're going to take another step, right? So we, we oftentimes, as caregivers, can get out of that mindset that everything is a journey and there's steps to the journey. And so we have to, just as adults, we oftentimes can give ourselves grace because, oh, we're learning a new skill or a new hobby, or, you're not going to become a master painter or ceramic person overnight. We sometimes forget that about children, right? Because they look like an adult, they
Mm-hmm.
talk like an adult. They use the words of adults. Maybe they're really responsible in a lot of different areas as a teen,
Yep.
but there's this one particular area, and you're just like, why aren't you getting it? You literally understand the words, but we forget that their brains are still developing. Their social groups are all forming and contracting and expanding. They're practicing romantic relationships and things like that. So we have to take all of these things into consideration and realize, once we have the data and the story, really understanding how did I, as a caregiver, get to the story when the data may not support the story, right? There's some incongruence. Okay, I've been really stressed out, so I'm creating a story. I'm projecting a story that my child is not responsible and they hate me and they don't listen to me. And we can come up with all these unhealthy narratives about ourselves, about the relationship, which is the third entity, or about our child. And when we create these stories that are maladaptive and they're hurtful to ourselves or to children, we as the adults have to kind of step back and go, how can I shift that story? Oh, I think my child has just been unruly for the whole month. But the data says, oh, we've had six incidences, so to speak. Hey, they only lasted about 15 to 30 minutes. Okay, but I have this feeling inside of me that they're always, being difficult about everything.
Yeah, well, and that's I think pointing out like the fact that we all as humans fall into kind of like the cognitive dissonance, the black and white thinking, right? Like all of these like thinking mistakes, right? And I think that when you're doing work with teens and families, you almost have to like support the parents in understanding that in the same way that you would do that with like an individual client. Sometimes like being able to teach an entire family system, hey, this is what black and white thinking is, right? This is what the all or nothing is. This is what cognitive dissonance is, helps
Mm.
them see that in the family system and understand it and call it in a much more like educated, supported, like we're trying to like learn and do differently.
Yeah, I agree. And I think many parents can get locked into rules,
Yep.
behaviors, preferred traditions, values, right? In this house, we do not cuss, we do not yell, we do not. And so, as caregivers, we can all get locked into those preferences, right? Or rules, let's say. And when we do that, and we don't make room for a teen's humanity, they're still developing. When we don't offer them grace, we can really we can set things up to really damage the relationship. And ultimately, beyond all of the rule breaking and the problems and maybe sneaking out and experimenting with this and, other unhealthy behaviors at the time, when we sacrifice the relationship for rules, it sets up um, it sets the child up for failure. And ultimately, what I always try to come back to is like, what's more important, the relationship or the rules, right? And it's a very hard thing to confront in ourselves as a caregiver when we get into a power struggle and you're going to listen to me and things like that. So, and that means that as caregivers, we have to resource ourselves, right? We have to recognize when our bandwidth is completely tapped out and we need to step back and we need to like go on a walk. We need to go get some coffee. We need to go on a drive. We need to close the bathroom door for 5 minutes. I give parents permission to take a break. It's the number one tool that I think all families can benefit from when there's a value of like, okay, when any of the family members are stressed out, we have a rule, not a rule, but we have a way to pause, right? So I need a break. So I'm going to go take a break for 30 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. And at the end of that 30 minutes, if I need more time, I'm going to come back to you and say, hey, I'm still really triggered about what happened. I'm going to take another 30 minutes, right? And giving a teenager, if it's appropriate, that permission, right? Like, I'm really triggered. I just don't want to talk about this right now. I'm really mad. Giving a child permission to say, hey, I'm going to take a break. And the parent can set the timer, the teenager can set the time, and uh, and then come back. And sometimes uh, setting that pause or taking a break says, I can't confront the issue now, but in 30 minutes when I feel more regulated and my brain is online and everything and I'm not in fight or flight, we can talk about it. Or, when your child is not in fight or flight mode, you can address it, right? But when they're in fight or flight and they're angry and stuff, that's not the time to ask for their logical reasoning side of their brain to,
Oh my
you know,
God, absolutely. Well, and I think you're touching on the idea too. I think about family sometimes in terms of like group work, right? And we've all had
Mhm,
those projects in, middle school, high school that were terrible, right? The people who didn't want to participate, the people who were like, you're on your own, the people who tried to like, spearhead everything and wouldn't let you have a voice, right? And
mhm.
I think if we think about it in terms of like, how do we allow and welcome a new developing tween teen into the family in a way where we're also helping incorporate their preferences, their voice, their feelings, the way that they think things should be, right? And not that that always has to be like, not that they're always going to get their way. Who wants to be part of a group where no one is going to acknowledge or like welcome their opinion or perspective?
Yeah, exactly. To echo what you're saying is like, how do we make room? How do we steward a child's experience, right? Because they're out in the world and their brain is interpreting information. And so we ourselves as caregivers might have a religious preference. This child, in our family may be leaning in a different spiritual preference, right? And so what's most important, right? And so allowing them the opportunity to critically think, to ask questions, to have, I like vanilla ice cream, they like strawberry ice cream, and really sort of discerning out um, where where can we step back, allow a tween teen to have their own preferences and learning from the world and things like that, and how can we steward the information that they're receiving, which is critical, stewarding the information that a child receives. And as long as it's not a safety issue, I recommend, okay, how, even though you might be uncomfortable as a caregiver when there's some differencing of values and opinions and preferences, how can we still steward their experience and realize that teens are developing? They may be committed to being the best soccer player in the world in February, and by April, they want to play the violin. And so, how can we kind of go with the flow and allow them to safely go out into the world, but still have the guardrails of mentorship, stewardship, family, traditions, values, things like that?
Yeah, no, a thousand percent. And I think about it in terms of like scaffolding too, right? Like,
Hmm.
how do we scaffold that process for them so that they can learn to then do it on their own in the future, right? And
Yeah.
if we're just like shutting it down and being like, no, you can't play, the violin because you already committed to soccer, right? Not even open to discussion. There's
Mm.
no voice there for them. And you're not
Yeah.
helping them through that process of understanding like, what would this mean for me, right? What would it mean to give up soccer to play the violin? What would it mean to like be part of the orchestra? What would it mean to like entirely change from like a sports to like an arts career, right? And there's like really valid questions there, right? Like, did you want to play it in college, right? What would it look like if you didn't have a soccer scholarship in college, right? Like, what would you miss about being part of the soccer team, right? We're asking all these really important problem solving questions to help them understand that choice, right? And
Mhm.
allow that voice in. And what's really interesting to me sometimes is that when you have that conversation, sometimes the kids are like, oh my God, yeah, you're right. Like, what would I do without my soccer team? And so it's not even that they're in the process of trying to disagree with you and trying to be like rebellious or whatever. Like, they're interested in this thing. How do we help them understand that in a way that like gives them the skill so that way when they are 25, they can sit there and really process through like, what does this mean for me? What would it look like?
Parents, caregivers can inadvertently teach you can never question authority. I'm not going to think on my own. I should just accept what the authority says. And I have no voice. I have no autonomy, sovereignty, those sorts of things. And so most parents want their children, their teens, to make good choices, to prepare them to be out in the world and have critical thinking skills. And so, I think finding this balance. Okay, I hear that you want to play the violin. That's great. Um, I want to support you in that, but I also want to ask you some questions around it, right? So, what's the benefit of playing soccer for you? What do you like most about it? What are you most challenged by, right? What's the appeal about playing the violin? Is this because you heard some song and now you want to play the violin? And kind of helping them discern out and have critical thinking skills about, what does it mean to transition from one thing? Okay, well, we paid $1,500 for cleats and the uniform and the membership and the travel and blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, okay, we're going to move away from that. So how can we, so we can't put $1,500 into a violin lessons, but what can we do, right? So helping them navigate and learn because, most children don't understand what parents and caregivers go through on the adult side to make something happen for a child. So helping them understand what it took to get there, right? Okay, well, how are we going to solve this problem? Because we don't have money for a $1,500 violin, but maybe we can get the $200 violin. Okay, can we get our money back for the soccer? That sort of thing. So helping children and teens kind of think through, problem solve. And when we do that, they can grow up to be autonomous, well thinking, well expressed, well advocated. They can advocate for their needs because most parents, I think, want children who can advocate for their needs in a healthy way,
Absolutely.
right? And their job, in a romantic relationship, those sorts of things. So we want to teach that life skill early on so that they have plenty of practice. So that when they get out into the real world and their boss asks them, maybe, can you work an extra 4 hours when you've already worked 8? And, the child can advocate saying, no, I can't do 12 hours, but maybe I can work an hour more until the next person comes in for the shift and stuff like that. So learning how to advocate and critically think through things will prepare them to be the best adults possible.
Totally, totally. And I think that I want to go back because you had said something, about how when teens look and act and talk like adults, right?
Mhm.
There's this assumption sometimes or this impression that like they're there, right? And they can handle adult responsibilities with adult things. But
Mhm.
what's really interesting when we're talking about this is that development is never linear, right?
Yeah.
And because we're trying to break down these like big steps into little tiny pieces, it can feel so frustrating, right? I don't think there's a single person, I don't know, who like remembers teaching themselves how to walk as a baby, right?
Right.
Like surely there are people that have had that experience where they've had to teach themselves how to rewalk as like an adult or a teen if they've
Mhm.
gone through something medical. Um, but we don't remember that. So we don't remember all the tiny little pieces and all the things that need to go into play to like
Mhm.
do that thing. So we had brought
Yeah.
up an example of like cleaning your room, right? And like
Yeah.
for most adults, when they're like, oh, clean your room, we're like, okay, cool, clean my room. I get it, right? That just translates automatically versus when you're talking with like, let's say a younger tween, they're like, what does that even mean?
Mhm.
What
Right.
does clean mean for my family? What does clean mean for me? What does clean mean for my room? Right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
the steps to clean, right?
Yeah.
And then how do I go through that process? How do I fold? Where do I put things? Where does this go? Where do I like it? Right.
Mhm.
Um, and it's actually I was talking to a family the other day and like the parents had a very consistent structure with how they wanted to see something be cleaned. And it was a really big struggle. And so we had to sit down and really boil that down into like, what does this mean for you? And also, what is your kid's perspective on all of this? Right. And then sitting down as a family and talking with the kid is like, well, this is what this means to me. And I was like, well, it's very clear, right? Why we're so disconnected is because we're not even on the same page with what that is. And up
Right.
until that point, there was like a lot of kind of pushback on the parents' part about like I can't shift this because this isn't what that means to me, right? So then we're
Right.
talking about like ushering like in a child's perspective into the family, like how do we kind of like morph and grow as our kids morph and grow as our young adults become adults, as our like teens become, like really a vocal member of the family.
Yeah. Yeah. And we may have an idea of what clean means. The teenager will become an adult. And maybe what clean means to that teenager means I don't bleach everything, but I kind of keep it tidy and I take out the trash when it's full. But right? But for us, it's like we bleach everything once a week and we mop the floor, sweep the floor, blah, 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 right? And so as they're developing, it's imperative that we be careful about the assumptions we make.
Yeah.
Because when we make assumptions like, oh, when I say clean the room, they know what exactly that means. I have to do 7 steps, right? But to the teenager, it's like, well, there's no trash on the floor, but it's okay that my clean clothes are on the floor, right? So kind of being very clarified about what that means and also supporting a teenager in kind of getting from point A to child's preference or the parent's preference, right? So here's what I mean. So, maybe I want them to do all 7 steps, but like I said, there's approximations, right? Okay, so I'd like you to take out your trash and I'd like you to make sure there's no clean clothes on the floor. Let's do that for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Celebrate that, positively reinforce it. Okay, thank you for doing those 2 things every day. I'd like you to, make sure there's the floor is swept or something like that. Or I'd like you to put away all your toys, or I'd like you to put away your video game system or something like that, right? So just gradually kind of increasing it because, you know, um, if we bombard them with all seven things at once, we can create a lot of friction and pain and suffering for ourselves as adults. And we create a lot of suffering for children because they don't get it or they're not used to cleaning. And now we're going to go from not cleaning anything in our room to, to like all of these steps, right? So giving them the grace to like gradually learn how to do it. And that's why I always, when I'm talking with parents and, at when the child is like 12, 13, like, okay, we know that as adults that time really does pass pretty quickly, right? And so being intentional, starting as early as possible, um, teaching, giving them a long runway to learn these skills, to make mistakes, to have hardships and heartache and frustration, starting as early as possible, as developmentally appropriate as possible, right? So we have super responsible 10-year-olds and we have super irresponsible 17-year-olds, right? So
Yeah.
taking into consideration who that child is, developmental capacity, maturity, responsibility, all those sorts of things. And then you have, if you have siblings, right? Like you have to take all those. So you can't necessarily treat the 17-year-old like the 15-year-old. Customizing and really nuanced about each child has their own unique relationship with the parent and stuff like that. So,
And that's what I was kind of thinking about as you were talking, because I feel like, when you were talked about the example with like the room cleaning of like, hey, like I want you to do this. I think that there are a lot of kids who have good relationships who are like, okay, fine, I don't mind. But what do you say when the kid is like, I don't give a shit about what you want, right? Like, where do you start, right? When you're focusing on an issue with like your room is filthy and you
mhm.
need to do these things, and oh my gosh, you also hate me.
Well, first off, I want to acknowledge the discomfort of that space, right? When a parent is like, I have pleaded, I have begged, I have cried, I have been angry, I have tried all these different approaches, right? And nothing's working, right? So just acknowledging that, right? Like, here's where we're at, right? That's important to empathize with and
Mm-hmm.
to acknowledge, like, parents feel defeated, they feel
Yeah.
unappreciated, they feel disrespected, to acknowledge all of those things, right? And we can't fire ourselves from the job, right?
Right.
Right? I am, I'm terminating my parenthood. Pack your things and get out. We can't do that, right? So we're committed. And that means maybe I need weekly support. Maybe I need to take a class. Maybe I need to go to a support group. Maybe I need whatever, right? So resourcing ourselves, right? And I, we talk a lot about timing, right? Like, when is the best time to approach your teenagers? Sometimes it's at night when they're kind of calm, they're kind of getting ready for bed. Maybe it's on the weekend, right? They're not in school. There's a lot more freedom. So now we're not interrupting their video games or
Right.
something like that. Or maybe it's in the car, right? We're driving, the video game system is not in front of them. We're not directly facing each other, which can kind of feel confrontational depending on who you are and cultural expectations, right?
Totally.
So sort of sussing out like where, how, all the W's, where, when, why, how can we approach this? And enrolling a child into the problem solving, right? And so, okay, well, here's what I need. Well, what do you need? Right? Being curious. I need you to leave me alone. Okay, I hear you, and I want to leave you alone about this, but if I give you what you need and I'm not getting what I need, that would be like you asking for a video game and me just flat out denying it, right? How would that feel? How would that feel if you asked me for a special video game and I just shut you down and said no? Would you want to throw a fit? Yeah, how would that feel for you? I'd feel angry. I'd feel sad. I'd feel frustrated. Okay, well, that's how I feel, right? So that's how I feel as a parent when I'm asking for what I need and I can't get that, right? And so in my parenting class, we kind of talk about finding that balance of meeting your own needs with meeting your child's needs, right? And best case scenario, it's kind of symbiotic, right? My child comes home on time because I need to take them to their soccer practice, for example. So some symbiotic relationship there. But when it's super frustrating and a child is resisting or disrespectful, what is the smallest movement forward that we can make, right? And so maybe the child's like, picks up one piece of trash and puts it in there. Great, thank you, hallelujah. Do you want a clown and a magician and a pony? Kind of make it fun, bring humor into it, bring curiosity into it, because when we do those things, um, we can kind of lighten the mood, especially if we've been in a power struggle with a teen and we're pushing and pushing and pushing and they're resisting and resisting and resisting. Sometimes we need a break. Sometimes we need to ask for help because we get our blinders on and you know um, they're not doing this. I've tried all these different ways, right? Kind of we're circling back to the beginning of our conversation. We get so locked into I've done this, I've tried this, I've done this, I've done this. And so having an alternative perspective or having someone else that has a different relationship with the child, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes teens are much more open to talking to adults who are not their parents, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And so maybe we need an outside resource to talk with the teenager and kind of help the teenager see like to explore how does my parent feel? Why am I resisting? Right. Um, what would it mean for me to do the thing for my mom that she's wanting me to do? How might she feel, right? What would be the reward in that, right? Oh, maybe my mom is in a better space and she wants to take me out to the mall so I can get the shoes that I want versus the shoes that, you know, I'm not going to, or the shoes that, she wants to get me, right? She wants me to get the $80 shoes, but I want the $120 shoes, right? So exploring how can we get from point A to A point one, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. No, it totally does. And I think too, like when we're thinking about, I don't know, like priorities within a family, right? Or priorities within a relationship, and we're having, there's a contentious battle going on, let's say over the cleanliness of the room, right? And I really always want parents to kind of like take a step back and like do a really truthful assessment of your current relationship with that kid. Because I think when you have the understanding and the insight to be like, you know what? I haven't seen my kid lately. I've been really like maybe like in a bad mood, work has been really stressful, I haven't been cooking. Be taking into consideration all the other things that could be impacting like their relationship, then I think it reprioritizes like what is the priority here, right? Is the priority like they're having a sparkling clean room where the floor is bleached and everything is mopped and wiped down and dusted? Or is it like I need to like take a step back and like reinvest in this relationship with my kid and really get into a ground stable, safe space so that all of those things can be connected through vulnerability?
Yeah. So a lot of parents, and I was just talking, the mother that I was talking to yesterday, we talked about this. I said, how can you repair the relationship before you ask for something, right? Because when the relationship is strained or broken, asking for compliance or something, a new habit to be, implemented, there's no relationship to build from that, right? And so repairing the relationship first, because the relationship is the platform in which difficult moments can be navigated, right? So if you and I have a positive relationship and you come to me and say, I really need help with the trash. It just ends up overflowing. I'm working 10-hour days, 7 days a week. I really could use some help. If you and I have a positive relationship and I care about you, I'm like, sure, I got it. I got it. I'll take care of it when I get home, right? But if there's no relationship or we have a contentious relationship, there's no reciprocity, there's no rapport, there's no love in which to ask for that thing. So, and teens are they're a black belt in asking for what they want, right?
Oh yeah.
But yeah, they are a black belt. I need, parents are an ATM, an Uber, a doctor, a cook, a house cleaner, right? So as caregivers, we wear all these hats, right? But moving from egocentric to ethnocentric, like, th- you know, there's more than my needs in this space, right? Okay, our pet has needs. The mom has needs, the dad has needs, the sibling has needs, the house has needs, right? And so moving a teen from it's all about me to it's all about we,
Mhm.
right, is really important.
Well, and I know when we had initially connected, we had talked a lot about kind of scaffolding and like welcoming people like into adulthood, right? I think we're talking about like
Yeah.
we kind of like set them up to be successful. How do we help them learn the skills? How do we like support, the scaffolding and the development and not like enable, and build
Mm,
patterns that just aren't like effective, right?
mm,
And I think about the idea, and we had talked about it, like the idea of kind of like welcoming, like raising boys and welcoming boys, right, into that space where good connection is like really important,
mm.
right? Can you share a little bit about that? Because I love this topic.
Yeah, so in my research as of late, there's it kind of hurts my heart that there's the statistics are, I mean, it is what it is, but boys and just teens in general are more prone to suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression, body dysmorphia. There's all of these things that are coming up in adolescents and teens, and the things that maybe we did not have to navigate as children. We didn't have to navigate social media because there wasn't social media, right?
Just
There
MySpace.
was, yeah, I had 500 friends on MySpace, right? And so having compassion that our children are not only navigating the biological process of maturing to adulthood, they're navigating technological information is being inundated. They're getting access to so much information. They do not have the brain capacity to accurately interpret that information, put it in its proper context, right? And so for me, something that I am moving more into the space, especially around boys, is rites of passage. In indigenous cultures, Aboriginal cultures, in different parts of the world, um, adults in indigenous cultures understood that the maturing process, the maturation process really needed kind of a delineation, a ritual in which you were a boy and you got the freedoms of a boy. You got the lack of responsibility, the ability to kind of make excuses, the ability to play and have freedom and all of these sorts of things in the tribe, right? To there's a rites of passage, and that rites of passage kind of mimics the hero's journey, right? So there's got to be some trials and tribulations for the boy to experience themselves being courageous, disciplined, resourceful, to being strong, to being emotionally resilient, right? So this rites of passage that happens, and now the larger tribe, the larger family can now see you in a different way. And the boy can now become a man,
Mhm.
right? And there's a grieving process, right? And our society, our Western culture, society at large, we have lost those rites of passage. And so now, um, and there's tons of studies that our brains don't stop developing to about 25. And so now boyhood, adolescence is creeping into the 20s, right? So 50 years ago, when you turned 18, you could be drafted. You were expected to go out, or you were expected to take on the job that your father had, right? And if we look backwards, sons usually followed in the footsteps of their fathers, right? And so now with travel, nuclear families, these sorts of things, like you have a lot more autonomy in what you want to choose. Maybe your dad was a doctor, but I want to be a poet, whatever,
Yeah.
right? And so when we don't have rites of passage, now we have adolescence and all of the pros and cons that come with adolescence extending into the 20s, right? So now I can live in my mom's basement. I really don't have to get a job. I don't really have to get a driver's license because I really don't care about going anywhere. And so when we don't have rites of passage, we allow uh, boys to kind of hold on to the freedom of childhood without the responsibility of adulthood. And when we have a rites of passage, a healthy rites of passage, we are preparing them for the responsibility and accountability that comes with adulthood and being in the world and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of adults understand like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just go back. I'm going to pay bills for the rest of my life. I have to be responsible. I have to show up on time. I can't sleep in, all these sorts of things, right? There's a grieving process, right? And so when we help children, and boys specifically, when we help them grieve, letting go of all the benefits of childhood, but learning how to take all, there's a bunch of benefits of adulthood, right? We can stay up late. We can choose not to go to our job. We can get in our car and drive to a different city, right? So there's all these freedoms of adulthood, but um, children are not able to accurately see that. And so when we have a rite of passage, we can support them in going from boyhood to manhood and to know that they are developing the skills. Like as a father, I know my son is developing the skills of resiliency, critical thinking, reliability, dependability, discipline, all of these sorts of skills, so that when he leaves the nest, I have prepared him, I have challenged him, I have given him guardrails to fail, to make mistakes, to skin his knees, so to speak. And when we do that, we are preparing them to be strong, healthy, emotionally resilient men.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we've done, maybe subconsciously, such a disservice, right, to like our young boys, our young men in that transitioning to this and having really clear expectations of what it is to be like an adult male, right? What it
Mm-hmm.
is to be a man, right? And I'm sure you hear the stories of the people who are like, oh, my son is 25 living in the basement, I do his laundry, I cook for him, I do all these things, right? So I'm kind of curious, like where does that process start, and how, I guess, as a society, I know there's a lot of enabling, but like, is that on the parent piece? Is that on a societal piece? Is that like, we're just not teaching them the skills-based pieces?
It's so multifaceted. It really is so multifaceted. I think it really can start in the family unit, right? So if I am a father and I know one other father, I lead by example, right? And so I might have a 15-year-old, right? Or I might have a 10-year-old, right? And so I'm taking my 10-year-old out and I'm teaching him about homesteading, how to take care of the chickens, how to take care of the goats. And I am slowly and gradually increasing the responsibility, right? And I'm increasing the life skills, right? In my day, my father taught me how to change a tire. I literally, even though I didn't have a flat tire, I still had to do it. I had to get the jack out and all that, right? And so now we don't have to do it because everybody just calls someone else to do it, right? So what are the skills that I want for my child to have, right? And so there may be some small variances, but there's universal principles, right? I want my son to be strong. I want him to have courage. I want him to be emotionally intelligent, right? So, in our contemporary space, there is some flexibility about what it means to be a man, right? So, some families are like, you need to be stoic, you never need to show emotions, all of those sorts of things. And then there are some families that are like, I want you to talk about your emotions. I want you to be able to process anger in a healthy way instead of repressing it and that sort of thing, right? So having what for me, because I'm a data-driven person, I would have a father literally write out all the end results, right? I want my child to be resilient, strong. I want him to be disciplined. And okay, so how can I teach a child to be disciplined, right? Okay, I'm going to have them get up with me in the morning at 6 o'clock, and we're going to go feed the chickens before we go to school. Right? Before I take you to school, I need you to help me with the chickens, right? So I'm going to model the behavior while my child just walks alongside me, sees what I do. Okay, they're being receptive. Okay, I want you to do this. I'm going to watch you do it. Here's how I did it. I want you to do it. So, okay, you did a great job. Okay. And so I think that when, because we can have the most impact in a small tribe or community, right? So if I'm a father and another father sees what I'm doing for my son, and I'm being intentional so that I'm starting as early as 10 or 8 or whatever it's appropriate, right? So I am gradually increasing the life skills. I'm giving more runway for my child to gradually feel the discomfort of doing something new and it not being perfect. To, okay, I had you just, help me with the chickens. And so now I'm going to have you help me with the chickens and the goats, for example, right? And so when another father sees that, that father goes, oh, I'm going to do that for my son. We don't have chickens and goats, but we need to wash the car. We need to clean the gutters. And so when fathers see other fathers, right? And as men, we are always fathering ourselves and we are fathering each other if we're in a masculine community, like a men's group or a men's team. And it's so vital. I can't overstate this. It's so vital in our current society that we help boys become healthy men because if we don't, they will be raised by their peers who may not be in healthy families. They will be raised by the internet, by social media, by the red pill community, right? And they will start developing their own ideals about what that means. And so I truly believe that it starts in the family. So each family we work with, okay, where do you want your child to end up? You want them to have a healthy relationship. You want them to be a responsible person. You want them to be a good civic citizen. You want them to learn how to vote and look at the issues and be a balanced and fair researcher around politics and those sorts of things. Or you might want them to have your values, right? So at least you're teaching them how to think and how to feel and how to learn how to navigate adulthood, right? So to me, it starts in the family unit, but there's a larger need. So, people like myself will sing from the rooftops about this thing, and maybe 10 people, 10 fathers watch it. And then if 10 fathers do rites of passage for their children, right? Then those children grow up to see the value of a rite of passage and their sons become fathers, right? So, it expands and hopefully one day in the future, maybe our Western culture will have like a kind of a universal rites of passage, right? Each family may do it differently. Like if you're a Jewish family, you might be different than a Catholic family and things like that, right? And there are some of these rites of passage in contemporary Jewish life. There's the bat mitzvah in Catholicism. You have the classes that they take and things like that. So I think for families who don't have that, creating it is perfectly okay. And there's thousands of years of wisdom to build a foundation of a rites of passage for sons.
Yes. Well, and you spoke so beautifully about the entire process because I do think that, at some point along the way, like we kind of dropped that, for our boys and our teens and our like young men. And we're just kind of like, do whatever you want to do. And there haven't been really strong in some ways, like family systems and figures. And I think you can learn from a lot of different people that are a part of it. But I think so much of it too goes back to like the community piece you were saying, right? Of like, if a father witnesses this and it's really successful and another father will do it, right? I feel like it's the same thing with like mothers, right? It's the same thing with like aunts and uncles, right? It's like we're lacking such a strong like family, community, social tie at this point that you're right.
Mhm.
If we don't have people that are around surrounding these kids with like love and support and encouragement and opportunities for growth and risk and change, then we're headed towards this like red pill space where like that's comforting for them, that's containing for them, that's like like their narrative. And I think we've lost a lot of people to that. And like I would love
Yeah.
to see in the future like us having more of a strong ideal around like this is what it really means to be an adult. You don't just get all the benefits of an adult, you also have the responsibilities and the accountability and like those other pieces that go with it.
Yeah, yeah. And so if we look at it from a historical cultural perspective, right, when we were an agricultural society, you did have to be multi-generational families in the same home, and everybody contributed to the whole, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody worked the farm, everybody did the business, those sorts of things. But as uh, modern times developed, right? Families made enough income that they didn't have to be multi-generational. And then there was the support of this kind of idea that the true measure of success is the nuclear family, which is just the family. And now, cars, airplanes, all this sort of stuff. 100 years ago, you would get, or maybe 150 years ago, you would get as far as the horse could take you or the carriage could take you, right? So you lived pretty close still. You might live 5 miles or 10 miles from your home family, but everybody kind of lived relative geographically close, right? And so with modern technology, travel, those sorts of things, income increasing, those sorts of things, now families did not have to band together. Okay, now I can go live off in the city and my dad still lives on the farm and does the thing. And so it had its unintended consequences, right? And so now we've seen now the nuclear family is kind of isolated, right? And so now we don't have the advantage of having our parents, who are grandparents to the children, to bring their wisdom. So while I'm the parent and I'm going out and working, and this is very indicative of tribal cultures, right? So the elderly used to raise the children, while the strong and able-bodied teen 20s were out there in the field or getting food or hunting or whatever, right? The elderly uh, would stay in the village and monitor, babysit, so to speak, the children, right? So now we have all these modernization aspects, right? So now our grandparents don't have to watch the children. Now we wanted to move away from our small towns, so we moved to the big city, and now we have relationships and things like that. So I think we are seeing the negative consequences of that, and many of my friends kind of realize like, oh shoot, I'm going to have a baby and now I'm going to be by myself. And we are a two-income household. We need to move back towards our parents, right? For more support because our parents are retired and they've got a lot of free time and a lot more patience and wisdom because they raised us and things like that. And so, I see us uh, hopefully moving back towards that community, that aspect where, and it doesn't necessarily have to be family. It could be, my mom lives near me, but my friends who are a couple and they have children, they live on our land too, right? And so we work together. But there's that saying, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah. No, it's totally fair. And I think and a lot of my work too, I'm trying to encourage like community connections and how do we kind of like, lean on people because we're not meant to live solitary lives, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that because of the access in the cities and the development and stuff, that it's a lot easier to be like, I'm gonna go take this job in Chicago. I'll see you in a year, right?
Yeah.
You don't realize year after year after year that it's been 10 years before like you've actually reconnected with the people that you grew up with, that your family, your siblings, your whoever. Because I think there's this like false sense of security with social media where it's like, oh, I see you, I see what you're doing on Facebook, I see what you're doing on Insta, I see your snaps, right? But does that truly replace in-person connection? And if you don't see your siblings for 10 years, what does that do for you and support and like your, impacts on community?
Yeah, yeah. I've been traveling and I was at my sister's house and she has a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And the 4-year-old is a boy just so robust and curious and just learning so much so fast. And the last night that I was there, I was getting ready to leave and I felt this little like hurt in my heart. And I was like, man, I'm missing out on all of this wonder and play and him like full speed running into me and being like, let's build this thing and then jump on it. And I was like, oh, these little magical moments that I hadn't seen my sister in a few years, but he went from like 1 to 4, like in the time that I was gone. And now I'm like, wow, these are really just magical moments that I'm missing out on. And I'm like, okay, how can I create a life where I can be in community here and here and here and have the freedom to untether myself from like 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. And, maybe I make enough money to go on a trip and, that sort of thing. So I felt exactly what you were talking about with my sister. How can I be of service to my sister if I'm never there, right? I can talk to her on the phone, or maybe she'll send me pictures of the kids and her family, but it's not the same as like helping my 4-year-old nephew learn about different animals or how to write their name or whatever, right? And so we're missing out, I think, on these little beautiful moments that will we will appreciate for years to come.
All right. Well, I will wrap up with you. Again, thank you so much. I'll link everything below too so people can access you and then check back for part 2.